I'm Scott Lucas. This is EA Worldview's Guide to Iran. Last weekend, Hassan Rohani, cleric, longtime official, former lead nuclear negotiator, won the presidential election in Iran with a majority of the vote. But what exactly happened in this surprising outcome? Our 4-point guide. Point 1. This was not a conspiracy. There have been a series of outlets, some of whom are associated with the neoconservatives in the United States, who have declared that somehow Rouhani must have been manipulated, must have been put into place by the supreme leader, even though he wasn't seen as being amongst the favorites to win this election. Behind closed door, the mullahs came up with this result. They usually say this because they want to say that the Islamic Republic is not going to negotiate with the United States about nuclear issues, that it's going to pursue terrorism, that it will continue to try to take over the Middle East. And they're wrong. Rouhani was not the choice of the supreme leader and his inner circle. Indeed, the inner circle went so far as to disqualify Rouhani's mentor, the former President Hashemi Rafsanjani. The only reason why Rouhani was allowed to run was because Rafsanjani was not. Why did Rouhani win? Not because the supreme leader secretly supported him, but because those around the supreme leader and their allies could not get a unity candidate to win the election. In other words, it was their failure, not their conniving, that led to Rouhani's emergence. Point 2. This was not a free election. Then there's another explanation, which is put forth by advocates of the regime, such as the academic couple Flint and Hillary Mann-Leverett and their ally, Dr. Saeed Mohammed Randi of the University of Tehran. Somehow, they say, Rouhani winning shows the vibrancy, the dynamism of the Islamic Republic, and how it gives the opportunity for everyone to have their say. Absolute claptrap. Nowhere do the Leveretts and Marandi mention that Rafsanjani was not allowed to run. Nowhere do they mention that the ally of President Ahmadinejad, Esfendi Rahim Mashai, was not allowed to run. Nor do they mention that former Foreign Minister Manouchehr Mottaki was not allowed to run, or that hundreds of others were blocked. Nowhere do they mention that reformist parties have been suspended for years, that many political organizations have been disbanded forcibly, their communications cut. Nowhere do they actually mention that the Guardian Council is there not to allow an open election, but to limit it. In other words, not only the pro-regime advocates, but the regime itself, which bent over backwards not to mention Rouhani's election on Saturday, instead praising the epic of a high turnout. All of this is designed not to promote a free election of this president, but somehow that the supreme leader is presiding over a system that everyone accepts. Point 3. This was not a vindication of what happened in 2009. One of the reasons that regime defenders like the Leveretts and Dr. Marandi are trying to emphasize a free election is that they once and for all want to draw a line under any idea that there was fraud, manipulation, or repression in the last presidential election. The idea that President Ahmadinejad was not elected freely, but was put into office, while his challenger, Mir Hossein Mousavi, was not only denied that victory, but has spent the last 28 months under strict house arrest. This is not a whitewash. That is much too kind a term. This is an attempt to create a fiction, a myth. It is a myth that does not acknowledge that not only was the 2009 election manipulated, but that hundreds, indeed thousands of people would be detained, interrogated, injured, abused, sometimes killed because of the protest over that election. It does not acknowledge that 4 years later, many people are still in jail, unable to see families, forbidden to speak, forbidden to leave the country. It is an excess that does not talk about freedom, but speaks to repression. So if all that is true, what message can we take from the election? Point 4, it was the message from the Iranian people. This was not a free election. This was not a conspiracy. Instead, in the limited space allowed to them, millions of Iranians did come out to vote. They came out to vote not necessarily to support the supreme leader or his epic or the Islamic Republic. They came out to vote for the candidate of their choice, and of the limited choices available, a majority of them voted for the one moderate, centrist, non-principalist, the outsider from inside the system, if you will, Hassan Rohani. They did so in part in protest. Their economic situation is no better than it was. In fact, it's far worse than it was in 2009. Their political situation is no better. Their freedoms are no better. In other words, the Iranian people voted because they wanted to see a system which was answerable to them and not one that created myths to obscure their choice. It is important to recognize that message, if indeed we care about freedom and do not allow it to be used as a plaything by those who either want to denigrate or abuse Iran. I'm Scott Lucas. This is EA Worldview.